In the early morning hours of December 8th, 2000, 22-year-old Trevor Deely was out and about in the streets of Dublin. At the time, Trevor was working at the Bank of Ireland Asset Management building on Leeson Street. That night, he was attending his office's Christmas party at Buck Whaley's nightclub, located a bit further down on Leeson Street in Dublin's city centre. Despite the heavy rain and wind that Thursday evening, the local pubs and clubs were full of people getting into the Christmas spirit themselves. After attending this party, Trevor left the club at around 3:30 a.m. The rain was still not letting up, and without an umbrella, Trevor decided to head down to his office not too far away to grab one. The local taxi drivers were on strike at the time, and without the advent of Uber or Lyft, still years away at this point in December of 2000, Trevor decided to just walk. CCTV footage showed Trevor arriving at the BIAM office a short time later. A man dressed in what's believed to be a black hooded sweatshirt was seen in the footage, standing just outside of the office's front gates, having been there for approximately half an hour. When Trevor arrives at the office, the two seem to chat for a moment before Trevor walks inside. There, inside the office, Trevor made himself a cup of tea and then chatted up a colleague of his, Carl Pender, who was working the overnight shift that fateful evening. A few minutes later, two more men arrive at the office gates but leave just a moment later. These two men were later identified as colleagues. After a few minutes inside the office, Trevor grabs an umbrella and heads out once again, likely headed toward his apartment on Serpentine Avenue, located in the neighborhood of Ballsbridge. The time is just after 4 a.m., and the same surveillance cameras that captured Trevor walking into the office capture him walking out into the rainy streets of Dublin. At the time Trevor leaves the office, the man who had been standing outside of it, seen wearing dark-colored clothing, was gone. However, a short time later, another CCTV camera along Haddington Road would capture Trevor walking, but he wasn't alone. A suspicious man in dark clothing can be seen following Trevor from afar, and Gardaí, members of the Garda, Ireland's police force, believe that this is the same man spotted outside of the Bank of Ireland Asset Management office a short time prior. After this, Trevor disappeared without a trace. The man seen walking behind him remains unidentified today. Many years have passed, but no one knows what happened to Trevor, nor the identity of the man who was seen walking behind him, who we can only presume was following him. The only thing we know for sure is that the moment this young man walked away from the CCTV cameras on Dublin's Baggot Street Bridge, he was never seen again. This is the story of Trevor Deely. Trevor Deely was born on August 15, 1978, to his parents Michael and Anne. The youngest of 4 children, Trevor would grow up with one brother, Mark, and 2 sisters, Michelle and Pamela. There, in the Irish city of Naas, County Kildare, Trevor took a while to grow into his lean frame, standing approximately 6 feet 3 inches at the time of his disappearance with reddish hair and a distinctive walk. Described as a friendly kid, many remember Trevor taking a while to figure out what he was going to do for a living. Like his older siblings, Trevor was not particularly gifted, either academically or athletically, but over time he began to express an affinity for math. After finishing school, Trevor decided to study business at the Waterford Institute of Technology, working a part-time supermarket job on the side to support himself. However, he dropped out during his second year. This, however, ultimately led to an abrupt career change into an emerging market, computers. After dropping out of business school in the late 1990s, Trevor was admitted to a computer program in Dublin, which he had been introduced to through his sister Michelle. She later recalled, "He took to it like a duck to water. It was like turning a key in a lock, and he finally found what he really enjoyed, and he seemed to be really good at it as well." Shortly after completing this course in May of 1999, Trevor accepted a position in the Bank of Ireland Asset Management's IT department. At the time, Trevor was contemplating positions with at least 2 other companies, but his father Michael advised him, "Take the bank. Banks are safer than any of the others." Just 22 years old, Trevor started working at BIAM after following up on his father's recommendation. There, his colleagues described him as a hard worker who was ambitious, reliable, and popular amongst his coworkers. He quickly became an important part of the team there, and his manager, Dara Tracy, would later describe him as both very trustworthy and a good guy. In more detail, Tracy stated, "He was almost the perfect employee. He was reliable. Nothing was too much trouble. He was hungry to learn, and he mingled well with everyone in the company. He was a very happy guy. He was one of the nice guys to be around. He never bitched about other people. He had a very good work ethic, and he was very trustworthy. I'm not just saying this because of the situation, but Trevor was really a good guy." Glenn Cullen, one of Trevor's childhood friends, remained close with him throughout their early adulthood, having originally met during their first year of secondary school in Naas. Later talking about their friendship in an interview, Glenn remembered, "We did practically everything together. I never had an argument with him in any shape or form. Not about girls, not about anything." Conleth Lunan, another one of Trevor's close friends, later recalled, "Trev was a jovial character. He was always in good form. He had a good head on his shoulders as well. He was doing very well at work, so he had a serious side to him. He always took work seriously." In their early 20s, Trevor, Glenn, and Conleth used to hit up the local pubs and clubs together. They spent a lot of time on the weekends together, and all even had the same type of cell phone, Nokia 1610s, which were fairly common at the time. Trevor used to smoke either Marlboro Lights or Benson & Hedges, in a time before most places banned smoking indoors. He often used a Zippo, not matches, to light his cigarettes. His friend Conleth later stated, "We were all ale drinkers, which was quite unusual for that age group, but it was never falling around the place." While both of his best friends still lived in Naas, approximately 35 kilometers southwest of Dublin, Trevor lived in an apartment in Dublin itself. While he liked to spend his weekends with his friends, he wasn't known to be involved in anything criminal or suspicious. He was just a normal 22-year-old with an office job that liked to work hard and spent his free time hanging out with friends and family. Approximately 2 months before his disappearance, on the first Saturday of October in 2000, Trevor's brother Mark traveled to Dublin to attend a football final with a group of friends. Trevor went with him, and Mark later recalled the two having a great time, during what would later become his final memories with Trevor. "It was a time when I was really getting to know him. He was no longer my little brother by then, but more of a peer. His working life was just starting. He was starting to have his own money. We might as well have been the same age then." In late November 2000, just weeks before his disappearance, Trevor flew to the US, specifically Alaska, to meet up with a girl that he had met the prior year. She had traveled to Dublin during her summer vacation, and the two had kept in touch throughout the rest of the year. At the time, Trevor's friend, Glenn Cullen, worked for Aer Lingus as a long-haul flight attendant. As an employee of the airline, Glenn was entitled to discounts and free flights for friends and family. So through his job, Glenn offered to arrange for Trevor to fly the thousands of miles to Alaska for free. He later recalled, "I'm nearly positive he wouldn't have gone to Alaska if I hadn't arranged the free flight for him." He also later stated, "Trevor traveled from Dublin to Los Angeles, and then as far as I'm aware he got a connecting flight straight on up to Anchorage. This girl was at university in Anchorage. He went by himself to see this girl up in Anchorage that he had met in Dublin that summer. I never met her. She wasn't here for long." On Tuesday, December 5th, Trevor returned home from Alaska. Instead of going immediately home to his apartment in Dublin, however, he decided to visit his parents' home in Naas. Michael Deely, Trevor's father, later remembered, "He had only gotten to Dublin airport that morning and came down on a bus to Naas, and he was yawning all the time with tiredness. I remember him sitting on the couch at home and Anne was cooking a big steak for him." Despite suffering from pretty serious jet lag, Trevor told his parents about the many fascinating things he had seen on his trip to and from Anchorage. Sadly, though, his father Michael was a bit rushed, having to plan for a business meeting outside of Dublin, so he wasn't able to spend much time with his youngest son that day. Michael left for his meeting later that day, making plans to hear more about this trip the next time they saw, and Trevor only stayed for a few more hours before heading back to Dublin, with his bosses expecting him back in the office the next morning. Sadly, that was the last time that Trevor Deely's parents ever saw him. The Christmas party for Trevor's office was scheduled for later that week, Thursday, December 7th, 2000. If you recall, this would end up being the night that Trevor disappeared. Dara Tracy, Trevor's manager, later recalled the party starting at a Dublin nightclub called Copperface Jack's. After that, Trevor and his colleagues gathered for a meal at the Hilton Hotel on Charlemont Street, and then the party moved on to Buck Whaley's nightclub. Back in the city Naas, Trevor's friends Glenn and Conlith were in the midst of a night out themselves, while at the Hilton with his colleagues, sometime between 11 and 11:30 p.m. Trevor called Glenn, but they had a hard time hearing each other because of the background noise around them. Glenn later recalled, "I said to him, 'Trev, I'll call you back.' Then he called me back. I missed the call." Trevor left Buck Whaley's nightclub at approximately 3:25 a.m. At the time, a heavy storm was brewing outside, with gusts as high as 60 to 70 miles per hour. And if you recall from the episode intro, Dublin's taxi drivers were on strike. With the rain lashing down, Trevor decided to head to his office building nearby to grab an umbrella. 10 minutes after leaving the nightclub, Trevor arrived at his office and was let in after calling security. After heading inside, he made a cup of tea and then spoke to his colleague, Carl Pender, who was working the overnight shift that evening. Carl was the only employee in the office that night until Trevor arrived rather unexpectedly. A computer operator at Bank of Ireland Asset Management, Carl had not been at the office Christmas party and had only taken on the responsibilities of the overnight shift after his shift partner fell ill earlier that week and ended up in the hospital. In an interview, Carl later recalled, "When Trevor came in, he asked me, did I have time for a cup of tea? I said, yeah, sure. I just had something to do at that immediate time, and he said, grand, I just need to log on for a minute." Trevor then logged onto his computer at a desk nearby, and likely spent a moment checking his emails or something like that, possibly scheduling his task for the following day, which he still had to do. Carl stated later on, "I'm not sure if he was doing something to do with work or sending an email. I never asked him." Before leaving the office, Trevor and Carl had a cup of tea together. Then, at 4:03 a.m., the two bid adieu, and Trevor headed out into the blustery streets of Dublin. Armed with an umbrella, he headed off in the direction of his apartment, located in the Renoir complex on Serpentine Avenue in the Ballsbridge neighborhood. At around this time, Trevor tried calling his pal Glenn Cullen again, leaving him a voicemail. Glenn was already asleep at this point and had his phone charging downstairs in his kitchen, so he would not see the message until hours later. The following morning, December 8th, 2000, Glenn picked up his phone and discovered the voicemail message, which he later recalled saying something along the lines of, "Hi Glenn, I've missed you there. Just on my way home. All going good. I'll talk to you tomorrow." After listening to the voicemail, Glenn deleted it, not believing it to be significant at the time. Investigators would later attempt to retrieve this voicemail, but because of the technological limitations at the time, were not able to. So all we have from this voicemail is the paraphrased version that his friend remembered after a night out on the town, which likely got the gist, but may have missed something. Maybe something in Trevor's tone or inflection, or even noises in the background. It's impossible to tell. Glenn also doesn't remember exactly when the call had been made, but speculated that it came into his phone somewhere between 3:55 and 4:05 a.m., likely closer to the latter. According to Detective Sergeant Michael Fitzgerald, who worked the case from its inception, the last activity in Trevor's phone log came at 4:06 a.m. on the morning of Friday, December 8th. From this point forward, he had no known contact with anyone. However, that is not the last place that he was seen alive.